Okay. We're now moving item L from new business up to we're moving item L from new business up to old business, which is policy JCB, and we have information in our packets. Okay, was this your item, Dave, originally, or was?
It was my item, but Mike wants to speak to it.
Yeah.
He actually wrote this final draft, so refer to him if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I've tried to become very familiar with the agreement that we have with Manchester, and for me that takes so many readings, but one part of the agreement that we have with Manchester says on page 1, paragraph 2, that all Manchester high schools qualified, no, I'm sorry, that's not the right section. I don't know where it is there, but it says in the agreement that the students can go to, with the exception of those students who petition a sending district school board. Oh, it's in the first paragraph, right? Last sentence of the first paragraph on page 1. In other words, the agreement says that students can go to school not of record, other than Manchester, if they petition to the school board. And I think the way we have our policy right now is conflicting with that, because now we're using JCA, and I understand that was to get a group of students that, you know, it was getting late in the year and everything, but I think JCA is in violation of that part of the contract because it says it has to come to the school board. So with that being said and known, I'd like to make a motion, and I have copies if you want them, or I don't know if you already have them. It's the one motion that I made a while back, and I'd like to make a motion. I don't think I should read all this now, but make a motion to adopt this draft of the JCB policy so that it coincides or agrees with comes in compliance with the agreement that we have with Manchester. If I could pass out a copy and give one to Karen, and
Great.
I'd like to make the motion to accept this draft.
We have a motion.
Second?
Discussion, please.
A couple different reasons for this. Again, one is I think we need a JCB policy or some JCB, because the way we have it now, JCA is already there under state law. If anything happens that we find is in best interest of the child, that person can go to the superintendent under JCA, or there's two of them. They could go under hardship also and change the school that they go to. But for this, to comply with this agreement, I think we need it, as I said. Secondly, it says in the agreement that we can petition, parents can petition on a case-by-case basis. That doesn't mean hardship, that doesn't mean unique, or anything else like that. Case-by-case means that you can't just say in one class action, all of these parents are approved to go to another school, not of record. So it means one at a time, case-by-case basis. If you look at it one at a time, it's similar to what the superintendent just said that Auburn has with PICA, except in that contract they say 5% can go. Our contract with Manchester doesn't give a percent, doesn't say how many students. We're not limited to a number of students, but it does say it has to be a case-by-case basis, which means on a one, you have to approve those one at a time. And so I don't think a hardship is needed. I don't think you have to show some kind of unique situation for that child. If there's a program better at another school, or a parent thinks that another school would be better for their child, I think they should be allowed to go to that other school. Of course, they'd have to agree to pay for, or to do the transportation and pay for any difference in tuition. But I think this motion, or this policy, makes it so that it's whatever's in the best interest of the child is what gets taken, or best serves the individual needs of the child, as it says. Thank you.
I certainly agree with Mike, and I'd like to point out one other thing. I think in our haste in the spring, talking about JCA and JCB, we really neglected something. We directed as a board that we would like JCA to be used, and the superintendent quickly created a criteria, which I think is a very good criteria that fits that policy. And many students were approved under JCA. What we ignored is the fact that JCB is still a standing school board policy. And we have a letter from the state, which came after appeals to this policy, and I didn't bring it with me tonight, but I know we have it on file, that basically states that we should revisit this policy, and that we shouldn't have a know it as you see it policy. And this comes from the state, and I will be as guilty as anybody else. Once we all kind of talked about JCA, JCB got put on the shelf, and we never went back to address the state's concerns with that policy. And to my understanding, nobody has asked to use that policy, so really the subject has not come up. But I think we really need to do our due diligence and go back and try to get that defined in one way or the other. And I agree with Mike's way. If it's not going to be that way, though, I think then we're going to need to look at that letter, look at our policy, and try to answer the concerns of the State Board of Ed, so that our policy is clear for the public that want to use it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Tricia?
I first would say I'm not opposed to this policy being reviewed and looked at, but the Hooksett School Board does have a policy regarding how policies are handled. We have a policy board that looks at policies. In the past, when we've looked at this policy, it may not have gone to legal counsel for it to look at. I think the best way, if we're going to look at this policy, is for the policy to go back to the policy committee, and for the policy committee to look at it, get the advice of our lawyer. And I'm nothing against what you've done. It might be exactly what we go with, but because of the experience we had a year ago, and that it wasn't looked at by a lawyer, and we got into a hornet's nest of months and months of JCB, I think that the most effective way to handle this going forward is for this to go to the policy committee, be reviewed either by our lawyer or Barrett Christina, take the advice of the Board of Education, and make sure that the policy is sound before we make a vote. And if this is called to a vote, I will not vote in favor of it, because I think you need to, if you have this binder, you need to be going by the binder, and there is a policy, BG, that says how we develop policies.
I will say that I'll echo Tricia's comments. Mike, and Dave for going to the effort to develop a revision. I think we need to follow the policy and put it before the policy committee. It's coming back to us from the policy committee, but I believe we need to follow the protocol and not trying to hold things up. I think we can move quickly on it, but I do believe we should. So, like Tricia, I would not support it, but not saying I don't support the your draft, Mike. Just that I think we need to follow the protocol. Dave?
At our last meeting, people in the audience ask us what we could do right now to help alleviate their situation with the high school. This is something that we can do as a board. This is something that if it was going to go to the policy committee, it should have gone there and been back by now. We received the letter and the policy committee took no action that I know of to this date to review this policy. I think that we should move ahead with this. This has been talked about. We had Gordon Graham in here for an hour asking him every question we could think of about this policy. This policy is so less restrictive than the policy that you spoke about that I don't think that we're going to have any challenge on it. So to say that we have to go through a policy committee and so forth, the other thing is there's really very small changes to this policy. It's not a rewrite. We're not asking for a new policy. But I think we've neglected the citizens of Hooksett from the time we got that letter back from the state board that said our policy was faulty. And we've taken no action. That's a good 6 months probably now. We've taken no action. And I think now's the time to take action. If we need to waive the rules for the policy creation process, we can certainly do that at this time. But the citizens have asked us for help. And I think this is the help that we can offer them. Thank you.
Cheryl,
I'm in agreement. I think we do need to send this back to the policy committee for review. And in the interim, we do have JCA so that the students currently that may need action taken for their best interest. We do have JCA, so we would not be holding any child up from making a good decision for them. So I do think that we need to send this back to the policy committee.
Mike?
Well, I would just like to say that policy about making policies is for new policies, I believe. There have been many, many times when the school board has changed a slight, made changes to an existing policy, I believe. I don't think that revisions need to necessarily go through the policy committee. If it does fail and goes through the committee, I would hope that it would be done expeditiously and come back to us as soon as possible because this needs to be done.
Tricia?
I would point out that if in your packet you have the Hooksett, the most recent review of policies, policies BEDH, KE, KEB were all changes we made here to our public input that we ended up having to send it back to the policy committee because it was inconsistent with what our written Blue Book policy manual says. So it only makes sense if we've erred in haste previously that we do not err in haste this way. I just think you have to follow the procedures that you set up, because if you start willy-nillying around, then you get yourself into bigger problems. You have to stay diligent on what you say your rules are. I'm in no way saying I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying in the past we may have not had a lawyer look at it, and we should have, and I'm admitting I did not know a lawyer didn't look at it. My mistake for being naive, but I'm saying this time let's not be naive. We don't have anybody who is coming yet for next year. They're kind of waiting to see. So we have time. This committee can meet quite easily to review this. We're not holding someone's future up in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I'm just saying we really need to be diligent in what we do.
Dave?
Well, first of all, I would say not waiting for next year. I mean, there's people that want out right now. I can honestly tell you I have received one communication a week asking about how these policies work and how a person should navigate themselves to get out of Manchester. So I think that we need to do that. And let's be honest about this policy. There's one word in this policy that we're trying to change for the benefit of the public who doesn't have it in front of them. We're taking out the word hardship. And hardship was the legal question. It was the public battle. That's where the controversy came. Nothing else in this policy came up, and we had Gordon Graham come in here and talk about this. So to say that this, we're now going to be prudent and we're going to take our time when we are removing the one controversial aspect of this policy, to me is unnecessary, because you are relaxing the policy. So I think that we can go ahead and do that. I don't think that, I think the policy committee should have acted on this long ago in response to the State Board of Ed's letter, because they told us that this policy is faulty. Thank you.
Please.
Dr. Littlefield, could I ask you a question? Has any parent come to you to find out how they get their child to go to an alternative high school besides a Manchester high school right now? And has anyone been denied that right?
I don't remember. No,
Since September 1st?
Seriously. So I've had two different groups, or two different types of inquiry. I have had, since school began, did you say?
Yes.
I have had a request for this year for someone to attend, to leave Central and go somewhere else. And I did approve that. And this past week, I received my first inquiry in regard to next year. Like, what's the procedure that we're going to follow? And that's unclear right now. So I'm feeling a little urgency because people are going to start exploring options. And if I remember correctly, a year ago was like October and November, which were the peak times for those requests to be made. So I'm not able to give people an answer.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
I'd like to point out that we put the Manchester Maintenance Agreement on our website. So if a parent is researching, they're going to go there, they're going to read the contract, and the contract is going to say exactly what Mike pointed out earlier. All students go to Manchester except those that petition the school board. So I have gotten calls saying, what does that petition mean? What does that mean? So I have to really tell them in all good sense, no, don't do that. Go see the superintendent if you want to. And it's rather confusing. And why do I explain that? Well, because we have this word hardship that's never been defined, it's just lingering out there and has never been dealt with. So I think that we need to bring our policy in line with the Manchester contract so that we can execute it, and we need to bring it in line with what the State Board of Ed said. And I think that's a simple vote. It's going to relax it. I don't think that there's going to be a legal problem. And if we vote on this tonight and we want to leave it pending the approval of Gordon Graham, I'm all in favor of amending the motion to say that, if that's what we'll make the motion pass.
Anyone else? Tricia, if I could, do you have another scheduled meeting of the policy committee?
Not at this time, but it can be convened fairly easily depending on the schedule of the administrators.
If this is an unfair question, let me know, but when do you think you could get I'll say, a review of the existing policy, JCB, and obviously review what's been submitted here this evening? I'm trying to get a time frame. Is it too much to ask that it would be something we could see at the next meeting or the meeting after that? Next meeting being October 2nd and then the 16th?
I'm not really I'm not positive because it's dependent on the three administrators that sit on, it's dependent on the schedule of the administrators. I have pretty, a great deal of flexibility in a number of days during the week. But I could definitely contact Kathy Richards to coordinate a meeting as quickly as their schedules allow, based on that the superintendent sits on the committee and is spending a lot of time dealing with the Manchester
Understood.
issues. But within the next 2 meetings, I don't
Can I offer my 2 cents?
Please.
I had a dream the other night. Seriously, 'cause I have a dream. I had a dream the other night, and remember I told you the next day? And it was sort of like this kind of forum. Like there were a lot of people in the room, and I think I was at a board meeting, and I opened my mouth. And like one of the rules I have is I don't need the board to help me run the school system. I know how to do that. And the board doesn't need me to set policy. They know how to do that. So we try not to intrude on each other. And in my dream, I said something and the audience said, "Keep your nose out of policy." So my nose is not going to go into policy. I'm just going to ask the board to consider the effectiveness of sending the policy to the policy committee. Because the policy committee is Tricia, myself, and Steve. And in this case, the board is debating what that policy should look like. And I don't want a committee that's made up of 2/3 administrators to make that policy decision for you. You know what I'm saying? Usually policies are, there's been a change in the law, the change in the regulation, and we research what the best wording is and so forth. But this is about the content and the meaning of the policy. So I'd be much more comfortable if we were very clear on what the meaning was supposed to be and worded it properly and bounced it off Gordon, rather than having us make a decision on what the content and meaning of it is. I don't know if that makes any sense or if I'm expressing myself. And the other concern I have, I'll do whatever you want me to do in terms of implementing policy. I don't particularly like making that decision. It's work though. And I've even said no to some people. I just want to make sure that our parents, when they have a legitimate reason, get a prompt and fair response. And I've been working overtime to give that to them, and whatever you said as policy is fine. Except I don't think they should keep going back and forth. Because that person that called this week, I don't want to keep blowing her off and saying, you know, well, it's going to be a month or something like that. I'd like to be able to provide an answer. So I would suggest that if it goes back to the policy committee, that it go back with some very clear things about what the board wants that policy to say, and then we can do the wording. But I don't want to be in a position where I'm setting policy for the board. I think that's dangerous.
Mike?
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to my motion that says if the motion passes, that it will be reviewed and approved by our attorney first. That way we can have some, if he sees a problem in it, we can revisit it. But I think I agree with the superintendent. It needs to be done very soon and have this done to comply with the contract that we have in Manchester.
Second the motion on the amendment.
Okay, we have an amendment to the motion. And a second. Discussion on the amendment. Dave?
I agree with everything that Dr. Littlefield said, and under the current situation, Dr. Littlefield is bound by his criteria, which is published and everybody can read, but what he wants to do is almost irrelevant at this point, because he has to look at that criteria, he has to listen to what the person said, and he has to make a decision. So if someone wants out for whatever reason in Manchester, some of the things that have been mentioned tonight, and they don't fit up with that criteria, unfortunately, he's going to have to say no if he's going to follow his criteria. The proposal that we have here would be a much easier way, and it would take the responsibility off of Dr. Littlefield and put it back on the board where it's mentioned in the contract, and I believe it would satisfy the state board's criticism of our policy. So I would support Mike's motion and his amendment and hope that we can pass this tonight.
Mike, your amendment puts an interesting twist on it. I just want to clarify for everyone's benefit, if I'll say your draft goes to our legal counsel and is edited, which I have to believe it would be, no reflection on your draft, just because that's what Gordon does correctly. That revised draft would come back to the board for approval. Is that the intent? That's the way I would understand it based on the amendment.
Can we read the amendment back? Because I don't think it said edit. I thought it said approved or not.
Review and approve.
Reviewed and approved.
So reviewed,
But I'd be willing to, use the word, it's contingent. If it passes, it's contingent on the review and approval of our attorney. If he doesn't approve it, I think we do have to see what his issues are, and we have to rediscuss it.
make sure that would come back.
I'd like to withdraw my second in favor of a different motion, Mike, if you'd be willing to withdraw your first.
Yeah, I'll withdraw the amendment.
I'd like to amend the motion to say that if passed by vote tonight, the proposed policy would go to our attorney, and he would have his review ready for us by our next meeting, at which time we would vote on it.
A second.
To explain, therefore, we're passing it tonight for him to look at. So if he brings it back and there are edits in it, as Dana's mentioned, we'll have an opportunity to vote that night based on what we see or an amended version thereof if we choose to do that. That way it takes the whole, what the contingency is out, and it would be the vote of the board on October 2nd, up or down.
Cheryl,
Just to discuss the amendment, correct?
we're discussing the amendment.
Then I'm
correct?
going to wait because I do have something outside of the amendment.
I'm just trying to get myself clear on it, just for my own benefit. If this amendment passes, the draft will go to the attorney. The attorney will review, offer comments. The draft will come back to the board for final approval.
For the next meeting, by the next
For the-
meeting.
for the next
October
meeting.
2nd.
Yep, not knowing our attorney's schedule, but yeah, that's the intent for our next meeting, which is October 2nd. That's the way everybody understands it, okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? All in favor of approving? Yeah. Thank you. Again, the superintendent suggested the reading of the motion and the amendment.
The motion is Mike move. The original motion is Mike Dubus moved to adopt the draft of HSD file JCB to comply with the agreement with Manchester. And the amendment is David Pearl amended the original motion to indicate if the policy passed tonight, it would go to the attorney and he will have his review available at the next meeting for the board to consider voting.
So my understanding is if we pass both said yes to both tonight, there's really, it doesn't go through until our next meeting, no matter what. It goes through the attorney, and then our next meeting, we would vote.
That's my understanding. Dave?
And I think that's a great compromise, Mike, because I think that gives everybody that is tending to want to vote no an opportunity to see what the attorney says, and certainly vote no at our next meeting and defeat the motion at that time if they choose. And in the interim, the motion, the policy will remain as it is now.
I'll just add one final comment that I agree that this is an item that we need to address, but I will add my backing of the policy that, we do have a policy committee. And I'll say under, quote, normal circumstances, we should be sending policies to the policy committee for review, and then they would come back to the board for final approval. But I'll grant that this is an item that needs attention quickly. Okay, with that, any other comments? We have an amendment, so all in favor of approving the amendment as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We now have an amended motion on the floor. All in favor of approving the amended motion?
I think Cheryl wanted discussion and we
Thank you, Dave. Cheryl, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, and I'm still formulating my thoughts on it. Because my concern had always been that we only paid part of the tuition. I had 3 parents contact me that said that, and one of them who was in tears, said that I don't even have that option. So what do I do? And just to state that that's always been my concern. We are in more of a crisis situation right now than we were. And maybe it worked well then, but that is still a very large concern for me. Because it is not fair to all of those students, especially now. And how, if I think we would get ourselves into a situation, a very poor situation, if we start paying full tuition for some and not for others. There are students that are not, or families that are not going to be able to afford that, but it would really be in their best interest to send their child to another school.
Dave?
Cheryl, I agree with you, and I think we have discussed that in the spring. Looking ahead a little bit, things may change, because if we were to make a contract with another school, it may shrink that differential in a number of schools to near 0 or 0. So, I think for this policy, I agree that inequity is still there, but I think with our more long-term planning that we were talking about before, we may shrink that differential down to something that is doable for people. So I do agree with you.
Mike?
All set, thank you.
All set? Anyone else on the discussion of the amended motion? Okay. All in favor of approving the motion as amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
4 to 1.